For listeners that are new, Chris Temple is the founder of the National Investor, and Andy Bowering is the chairman of Apollo Silver.
For the last year and a half, or a couple of years, we've been excited to get this barite resource because we really believe that our first critical mineral will allow us to negotiate for some support, whether it's water or permitting support.
It's critical to understand for folks out there that the silver that you now have in this resource makes it one of the elite primary silver development stage projects, nearing development stage projects in North America.
At 185 million ounces of silver, now I'm combining measured and indicated, 125 measured and indicated, and another 57 inferred at Langtree, plus the other metals, plus the 130,000 ounces of gold now, that doubled. But aside from all those other bits and pieces, it is the largest primary undeveloped silver deposit in the United States. It's a first-class deposit. If the county and the government are on our side, then it's got a bright future.
When the generalist investors, the institutions are finally in a place where they can no longer ignore the moves that we've had in gold primarily. Silver's played a little bit of catch up in recent past, still has more catching up to do. But also with all of the stuff that's been in the news about rare earths and about our competitive situation with China, where we're on the short end of things right now. And they can't ignore this anymore. So it's very, very timely for you to have made yourself even more visible to those types of investors out there.
For disclosure purposes, Apollo Silver is a paid-for client on the Investor Ideas website. For disclosure purposes, our site does not make recommendations for purchases or sale of stocks, services, or products. Nothing on our site or this podcast should be construed as an offer or solicitation to buy or sell products or securities. All investing involves risk and possible losses. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Andy and Chris, it's so great to have you both on the show. For listeners that are new, Chris Temple is the founder of the National Investor, and Andy Bowering is the chairman of Apollo Silver. So we're going to start this conversation off. Obviously, I think the most exciting thing is the mineral resource estimate that I think everyone has been patiently waiting for. Very exciting news. Chris, do you want to give some commentary of what you read through? And then Andy, obviously, I'd love to give you the floor to give us the whole picture there.
Calico project in California, and Andy, on the 4th, you came out with some news increasing and putting in the measured and indicated category the silver resource now to, or what is 125 million ounces of silver. More important, or as important, depending on how people want to look at it, you introduced a pretty substantial barite resource. Barite being a critical mineral as defined by the U.S. government that we don't produce here these days in the U.S. and is very much needed in the energy industry. So, it's a big step forward, and I want to first focus on the silver increase. You upgraded the silver resource. You have a zinc resource now, a little bit of gold, and as you reported in that news release on the 4th, there's still upside for all three of those exploration-wise going forward, isn't there?
There's a lot of upside. What I would say is that, there was no new drilling, but effectively metal prices have changed so much that we're able to reduce the cutoff of what's economic. And so now, that adds another 14% to the silver resource. Now there's 125 million ounces of silver there that in our mind, at PEA level, is economic. And of course, we did a 10,000 reassay program to determine the zinc and barite. And so now you've got 630 plus million pounds of zinc that's in the resource. And zinc's on the critical mineral list of the US as well.
Right.
And you've got 3.4 million metric tons of barite. And barite's on the critical mineral list as well. The last thing I would say is that silver is on the prospective critical mineral list for 2025. Yeah, every 3 years, the USGS redoes the critical mineral list, and they're concerned about silver, and it's an elevated risk. Let's see if it makes the final list, but they're talking about it now, which tells me, based on the silver narrative we've been living for the last several years, if it doesn't make the list now, being elevated, it's probably going to make it in the next update. If it does make it, all three elements in our Calico deposit are on the critical list. And you know, with all your contacts in Washington, that's going to help us down the permitting road and for water. Like, there's just a lot of benefits to having 2 or 3 on the list.
Well, and aside from whether it does make that list or not eventually, Andy, I think that it's critical to understand for folks out there that the silver that you now have in this resource makes it one of the elite primary silver development stage projects, nearing development stage projects in North America.
At 185 million ounces of silver, now I'm combining measured and indicated, 125 measured and indicated, and another 57 inferred at Langtree, plus the other metals, plus the 130,000 ounces of gold now, that doubled. But aside from all those other bits and pieces, it is the largest primary undeveloped silver deposit in the United States. And when you start to think that Equinox and their Castle Mountain just got a Fast 41 expansion permit, and for those people that drive that connector road from LA to New York or to Las Vegas, you know, there's Joshua trees all around that area. With well-known desert tortoise issue. You know, none of those things are at Calico, and it's in a county that needs tax revenues. Like, I think we got something there, and it's going to take somebody outside the company to say that, but it's a first-class deposit. If the county and the government are on our side, then, you know, it's got a bright future.
Andy, does this change the targets for exploration now? Because I noticed that you have 86% increase in gold, even inferred. Like, are we moving towards exploration towards Langtree or Waterloo, or now you have the MRE? What kind of, has anything changed as far as your trajectory forward?
Ross McElroy, the recent hire as CEO, isn't here. And so, you know, I might take words out of it. Well, he's the guy that ultimately decides where and what we're going to do, but we are going to go back to exploration at Calico. Waterloo is ready for economic study. We're going to produce a PEA on Waterloo and Langtree, and then that PEA will tell us, are we going to go through a PFS on Waterloo, or can we look at Waterloo and Langtree as one operation? That's kind of what we're going to probably determine in 2026. But while that economic study is going on, we're going to do exploration at Langtree, because we haven't established zinc or barite there yet at all. It's still inferred and it's still open. Even Waterloo's open in a couple directions. And then all that new ground, the mule claims that we bought from Lithium Americas, highly prospective for silver. And that Barstow formation and that main Calico fault run right across, right through into that ground. So there's some grassroots exploration to do there. There's some advanced exploration at Langtree and continued work at Waterloo. There's a lot to do.
Well, Calico overall is a great project. We've talked about it before in all of our different previous discussions. I want to focus for just a second, Andy, on the barite angle, because we've talked about this numerous times in the past. It's been inevitable that you were going to have enough information and enough reassays and whatnot to be able to publish the resource you just did. to show that you've got, when you boil it all down, around 2.7 million tons of barite when you're through. For folks that are unfamiliar with that, they hear about silver and gold and zinc. Barite's not mentioned as often as any of those. Remind us what the main uses of that are for and why it's on the critical minerals list.
Barite is primarily a weighting agent that's used in oil and gas exploration and development. So a 20-pound sack of flour, if it's filled with barite, weighs 100 pounds. It's heavy. It suspends well in a bentonite mud. So it's ideal for keeping the drill pipe and your drilling fluids in the well bore when you're drilling. And, for those people that, when you're drilling for oil, there's gas kicks and gas comes up. And if you don't have barite keeping it down, you get blowouts, and Google blowouts, and you'll see what those look like. So it's something that's on every drill site, everywhere. 50% of it is imported, I think, from China. That's why it's on the critical mineral list.
Yeah.
There's a couple small operations in the US or a couple small mines for it, but it's half of it's imported. And the US is, as you well know, trying to resolve their reliance on imports from the other part of the world, especially the Asian countries. So
Yeah.
it's got a real opportunity. Drag on for a minute here. There is a military base just south of Calico,
Right.
a few kilometers south, that it's been shut in for a while. They might be using just a little bit of it, but most of it's shut in. And that military installation has water rights that we very much like to get. And so, for the last year and a half, or a couple years, we've been excited to get this barite resource because we really believe that our first critical mineral will allow us to negotiate for some support, whether it's water or permitting support.
So now that that's official, that you've reported this barite resource, is that going to accelerate some of these discussions with the proper parties?
Yeah, it will. You can't. It all revolves around having a compliant resource. Until you got a compliant resource, you really can't talk about it. And now we can.
Chris, do you want to just kind of give a zoom out overview? I feel like you can do that best as your position in the States. As Andy's mentioned, biggest undeveloped silver mine in the US, but now with this barite resource added, the zinc, gold, I mean, how big of scope do you feel like this project has become in the US right now at a perfect timing, really?
Well, look, I think that especially with this compliant barite resource now, that's going to be the difference, I think, in getting a lot more serious engagement potentially from the government now than things would have gotten before. Right now we enjoy pretty much the most favorable and positive policy tailwind of good intentions. And I think you'd agree, Andy.
Absolutely.
The president has issued numerous executive orders trying to push for permitting reform, accelerating things. You mentioned the Fast 41 designation, which has been around a little while. That actually predated what was done in the last administration, but that Equinox just got to expand their operation. The Fast 41, of course, however, did not do a whole hell of a lot of good for Resolution Copper in Arizona because the Ninth Circuit still threw a renewed monkey wrench into that operation. So there are unquestionably still hurdles out there. There are legislative ones. We have a very litigious society where there are way too many kicks at the can for people who want to stall extractive projects simply because that's what they're paid to do. So, that we still have to live with. But the big picture has become much more favorable under this administration. And I think with the barite aspect, I would expect to see something, Callie, in answer to your question, similar to with MP Materials Project in California. I have been saying for a while now that a lot of people in this industry got a little bit prematurely exuberant early this year when the president was pushing for permitting reform and signed the executive orders he did. Not that they don't mean anything, don't misunderstand. But economics has still got to work. The litigious nature of all this stuff has still got to be fixed. All of these things need to be done. And what the administration showed, because we have this serious contest, I've called it for a while a World War III over currencies and commodities that's already underway. When you consider that the administration, among other things, when the Defense Department became a major owner, basically, of MP Materials, guaranteed a price roughly double the current market for those finished rare earth products out of that thing, that was huge. And it's an acknowledgement by the government that permitting reform is not going to be enough. We need to be able to break away as well from the downward skew artificially, really, and prices where China, with a lot of these commodities, they've deliberately lost money on a lot of these things for years just to drive everybody else out of the marketplace.
Yep, you
It's
bet.
why all the downstream processing for so many of these things is done in China. So I think the fact that we still are importing barite, and look, it's not looking great right this minute for the domestic oil and gas industry because prices have weakened and the rig counts are down and stuff like that. But inevitably, we will see more drilling. They want to open up more lands for drilling. And the barite that you're going to have production of one of these days soon, we hope, Andy, at Calico, is one of the inputs to making drill baby drill work.
Yeah, I think that administration right now is a major sea change, but this is going to continue for a decade or two. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
it takes so long to take a mineral deposit through exploration and economic study and then permitting and then building, and it takes years. And so for the last, I don't know, since World War II, we have been trending towards this globalization. We have relied on everywhere else to mine it, process it, finish it, send it back to us. And now we want to switch back. It's like a big freighter. It just doesn't turn on a dime. And so this is going to be, I think that us investors in this space are going to have, I don't know, 10, 15 years of joy here. It's gonna take some time, but wow, look at the start.
You just did your share consolidation, Andy. It feels, right timing again, and to build that credibility now that you have your MRE. Chris, do you want to give some commentary first, and then Andy, to follow on the strategic plan of this?
Because it was so ridiculously cheap going back a year and a half ago, I told my members who I recommended Apollo to quite some time ago to double and even triple up on what they had. And now we've seen the share price go up about fivefold since I told folks to do that. And so I'm happy I did. And there's a lot of good exploration stories out there with the kind of seasoned and proven leadership like Andy represents, and now Ross as well, the new CEO. He got what, $1 billion plus out of selling fission uranium. That's not small potatoes either.
Exactly.
I've shared with a lot of people recently something that's very interesting that's been going on in the US market. And of course, a lot of Canadian juniors, especially, for a long time have bemoaned the markets generally because everybody wants to chase AI stocks, the latest crypto fad, whatever. I don't know if you even are aware of this, Andy, but for a while now, I get all of the emails from the usual suspects that tout continuing education classes that you need to take if you're a registered investment advisor, a FINRA regulated broker. Every so often, you've got to take so many credits of classes to keep your license and prove that you're not a complete idiot. And you at least have half an idea what you're doing and what's going on in the world. Did you realize that these days, I would say between a quarter and a third of all of them, and I get several per week, between a quarter and a third of the classes have to do with small cap stocks, precious metals, nuclear energy, commodities generally. They're coming back around. And it's very timely for you to have done the share consolidation. You were already, doing very well in the marketplace. So now you got, as we're recording this today, approaching a $4 Canadian share price. And that puts you on more radar screens. But just as important as that, it happens for you, Andy, at a time when the generalist investors, the institutions are finally in a place where they can no longer ignore the moves that we've had in gold primarily. Silver's played a little bit of catch up in recent past, still has more catching up to do. But also with all of the stuff that's been in the news about rare earths and about our competitive situation with China, where we're on the short end of things right now. And they can't ignore this anymore. So it's very, very timely for you to have made yourself even more visible to those types of investors out there.
I was saying to somebody this morning, if 10% of the ownership of NVIDIA decided to sell it and invest in resource developers, you'd have $420 billion chasing an industry that isn't that big.
Right.
It's crazy. I mean, that's a bit probably bigger than that, but point is that our industry is quite small relative to the half the companies that make up the NASDAQ 100. And now all of a sudden, though, we're becoming more important. For sure, gold and silver are becoming an asset class that they talk about. I mean, it used to be that, and I remember I've been around this game for 40 years. I remember 30 years ago watching CNBC, and you didn't get a gold quote on it. You didn't get it. Now it's one of the primary, it's up there all the time, and they're talking about it, and they're sovereign banks globally now own more gold than they do US Treasuries, is what somebody sent me. And so we're heading in the right direction. And finally, so yes, there's a marketplace for it. We know that, when you're a multi-dollar stock, you blue sky a lot easier in all US states than you do if you're trading the pennies. You get more respect. So we've got a great shareholder base. There was 242 million shares out. Now there's 48 fully diluted. There's 60 million. 8 million there's 12 million derivatives. 8 million of those are a warrant at $3.95 that will bring in $32 million into the treasury that we can spend at Calico or advancing Cinco. And half of the company's owned by insiders, strategics, and funds. So when you think about what's left for the retail public, it's not a great big float. And so, I think, and I don't know if it's really fair not to project share price, but I, like you, kept buying more of this. My family kept buying more of it to the point where, collectively, my family and I own about 11% of this company. We bought it all the way down at 8 cents. People can go follow my insiders. I bought another $250,000 worth of stock last week. I think we got a tiger by the tail. I think it's going to trade at multiples of this price given time, but that's my bullish nature. And the truth is we got a tailwind like we haven't had in 15 or 20 years. So, now's the opportunity.
And Callie, I did her investor boot camp with Callie and some other people back in June, and a couple of the slides I shared, the old anecdote about if you want to know what's really hot in the marketplace, your newspaper delivery boy or your cab driver, these days Uber driver, I guess. And I had a couple of slides showing the Uber driver today, turning across, looking over the back seat and saying, "Hey, can I tell you about all of the AI stocks I'm in right now?" And 8 or 10 or 12 years from now, he's going to turn around and say, "Hey, you want to hear about all the critical metals and precious metal stocks I bought?"
Well, yeah, and you mentioned MP just a few minutes ago. I mean, the Pentagon put 500 million into that, and so did Apple. And Apple put a pile of money into it too. Now we're getting vertical integration. We're not just getting the banks and the investment funds putting money in. We're getting government and industry putting money in to advance the development of all these projects faster, better, bigger.
Yeah.
Talk about a tailwind.
We just had the Fed cut 2 days ago, And the setup for just silver in general and the commodities markets, because I mean, we've seen silver hit 42, 43. Maybe we get a little bit of a technical pullback, but what are you seeing kind of as we round out the end of the year for the commodity space?
Well, look, long term, and I still have some concern over the massive bubbles that we have in certain parts of the financial markets right now, in a lot of the corporate debt, in many areas of the stock market. Certainly not where most resources are concerned, which are undervalued, but everybody is, and this is very well known. They've piled into the Mag 10 stocks, to the cryptos, to the AI stuff, the chips, all that kind of thing. And those are just stupid nosebleed valuations. If and when those correct, and I think it's more when, the question is near term, especially if you had a more substantial overall market correction. That's the kind of thing that would take everything down with it. I mean, even uranium stocks, which have been hot, white hot again recently, you'd have people selling them, not because they want to sell them, but because they've got margin calls and they got to get liquid, at least for a while. So you've always got that danger near term that you're going to finally have the steam, come off of everything and it's going to affect everybody. That aside, long term, the mantra of the Fed, Andy, you're old enough like I am to remember who Richard Russell was of the Dow Theory letters.
Yeah.
And he was the one that coined the famous term inflate or die.
Mm.
And that's where all the world's central banks are, including the Fed. The Fed wants to inflate slowly and give a bunch of mumbo jumbo reasons about it. That this 2% inflation target, forget about it.
Mm.
Trump himself has come out and said, I want a weaker dollar. I want plenty of them so that we can better manage the debt. Well, of course, and he's honest about it.
Yes,
The only way you handle the debt right now is to inflate your way out of it.
that's right.
And that means the values of all these various things go up. And what I'm excited about, and again, even though it may cause some near-term headaches for the economy, inevitably there will again be much more aggressive fiscal stimulus from Washington. When it comes, it's going to be almost entirely focused on these things that we've only seen the first fruits of now. Getting our own energy situation in order, getting our own metals and downstream industries back under our control. Look at what the president just did in the UK where nuclear energy is concerned. So there's a lot of money that's gone into some of these more questionable areas that the average person doesn't understand. But inevitably, we're going to see not just inflation give the tailwind it traditionally does to all of these different commodities. And I think, validate what Andy said a few minutes ago. We've got 10 or 15 or maybe 20 years ahead of us as valuations and commodities get somewhere near what they are for these other sectors. But we could get a jump start or two along the way because it's going to be an economic and national security imperative that the government really get a lot more serious. I mean, the permitting reform being discussed and some of the measures that have been taken, the MP materials, the handful of grants that we've seen so far from energy and defense departments, those are nothing compared to what's going to have to come down the road. And it's going to support all commodities.
Andy, Chris, I don't want to keep you guys all day, but do you want to have any closing remarks on Apollo, what investors can pay attention to or look forward to? And then, Chris, do you want to give any commentary for a close as well?
All right. So what I would say about Apollo is, and we're not talking about Cinco de Mayo in this episode, but we have an option on a world-class project in northern Mexico. The CEO and I were just there for 3 days in the community. Those of you that follow Apollo know well the issues at Cinco de Mayo, and I guess what I would say is that based on my 35 years in this industry and having fixed problems like this globally, we're really close to telling the street something about Cinco de Mayo. And again, I'm just gonna say we got a tiger by the tail. It's gonna become as important to this company as Calico and maybe exceed it by several fold. The future looks pretty bright, and that's all I can say right now. I know it's forward looking and it's leading, but there's good news on the horizon.
But I'll only wrap that up by saying that, there's only a handful of people in this industry who have got the stature and have been able to raise the money for good projects and cash out many of them like Andy has done. And so I've got all the confidence in the world he's going to make this work.